King Ludwig II of Bavaria led a forbidden double life, entertaining many gay lovers and spending millions on fairy tale castles and lavish works of art. But he was so caught up in his dream world that he failed to see his enemies conspiring behind his back until it was too late. He died under the most mysterious circumstances, and his death has never been solved. But historians have uncovered new evidence that points to a shocking revelation. Ludwig Otto Friedrich Wilhelm was born in 1845 into a world of dazzling wealth and luxury as the eldest son of Maximilian II of Bavaria and his wife Marie of Prussia. However, despite his pampering and indulgence, a cloud of expectation hung over his life as he would become the future monarch. The young Ludwig would be rigorously prepared for his future duties. His tutors gave him an intense study and exercise regimen. The making of a prince was no easy task, and as Ludwig grew into a man, it became increasingly clear that he was a little bit odd. Simply put, Ludwig wasn't cut out to be a king. At his core, he was a lover of the arts and architecture, and would pass many joyous days at a fantasy-like castle that his father had built, called Schloss Hohenschwangau. Ludwig was an avid daydreamer and lived a rather insular life, but his eccentricities weren't the only thing that made Ludwig different. In 1863, Ludwig was assigned an orderly officer named Prince Paul, and the resulting intimacy they would have together changed his life forever. That autumn, the two adolescents spent 3 unforgettable weeks in each other's company, spending time riding together, reciting poetry, and bonding over their mutual love of Richard Wagner. It was the beginning of Ludwig's most impassioned relationship. However, only a year after meeting Paul, Ludwig's father, the king, passed away. All of a sudden, Ludwig was thrust into his new role when he ascended to the throne. Sadly, as he was still quite young, he was very much not ready. Not long after becoming king, one of his first actions from his position of power was summoning the composer that he was completely infatuated with, Wagner. He also flexed his newfound power by building a new court theater. It was an exciting and daunting new chapter for Ludwig, but throughout Munich, sordid rumors began to circulate. Some suspected that Ludwig's obsession with Wagner went beyond his adoration for the composer's work, and that he even harbored deep romantic feelings for him. This attraction was likely never acted upon, as Wagner himself had his own affair with a woman named Cosima. This, however, did not stop Ludwig from writing many letters to Wagner that were not subtle in their romantic overtones. Oddly enough, although Wagner himself was straight, his responses were surprising. Instead of rebuking the king's advances, he encouraged it. With a royal's purse in his back pocket, Wagner knew exactly what he was doing and led Ludwig on. But this behavior could not continue forever. In 1865, due to the composer's scandalous behavior, Ludwig had no choice but to send Richard Wagner away. Apparently, the letters were only fueling his infatuation, causing him much distress. In order to be with Wagner, Ludwig even considered abdicating the throne. Luckily, the composer was able to talk him out of it. After all, his art did rely on the king's generosity and patronage. As is evident, Ludwig was gay. When he became king, his closest comrade, Prince Paul, became his loyal aide-de-camp. However, Paul was more than just a good friend. During this chapter of his life, Ludwig kept a diary in which he expressed his true feelings for other men. Since childhood, his friendship with Paul had grown into a deep love, and their correspondence was full of mutual adoration. Throughout his life, Ludwig had a difficult time reconciling his romantic desires and his Catholic faith. Out of shame and necessity, the king suppressed his true feelings as best he could. As a king, he had a responsibility to eventually marry and produce an heir. Sadly, his longtime affair with his childhood friend came to an end in 1866 after Paul himself found a wife of his own. Although he was now a king, Ludwig was not the imposing force his father might have wished him to be. He despised large functions and tried to avoid social events at all costs. He was even quite shy and creative and preferred to spend his time alone. This behavior sparked tension among his government ministers, suspicious of their king avoiding his kingly duties. Although Ludwig's personality sparked tension among his peers, he did manage to win the hearts of his people. Ludwig had the face of a prince. He was young and handsome, with his pictures boasting a brooding gaze, an immaculate hairstyle, and a strong presence. Another reason for his popularity was his willingness to interact face-to-face with his citizens. The introverted king loved to travel and would spend time exploring parts of his own country. He'd even stop to have conversations with farmers and laborers, bestowing generous gifts upon many who displayed hospitality towards him. Even today, he is called the Unser Kini, meaning our cherished king. Because of these delightful interactions, he was exactly the royal the people wanted. His genuine kindness and lack of pretension endeared him to the common folk, who saw him as a monarch who cared for their lives, unlike the distant elites in Munich. As his reign continued, the need to produce an heir became more apparent day by day. Although he was secretly gay, he had no choice but to get married, and this particular hurdle became all the more pressing in 1867. He eventually became engaged to his cousin, the Duchess Sophie in Bavaria. Just like Ludwig's prior lover, the one thing that he and Sophie had in common was their mutual love of Wagner. However, this would not be enough of a foundation to sustain a marriage. Ludwig clearly didn't have his heart invested and kept flip-flopping, postponing the wedding date over and over again. Finally, in October 1867, he called the marriage off entirely. He felt like the whole affair had been thrust upon him, and he explained to Sophie that he only viewed her, quote, like a sister. Yet, there was another reason why Ludwig called off the marriage. Just as he was on the verge of tying the knot, he met a man that he fell head over heels for. His name was Richard Hornig, and he worked in his stable. They bonded over their mutual love of riding and horses, and before long, they were seeing one another all the time. Soon enough, basking in Ludwig's favor, Hornig even became the crown equerry and master of the horse. Together, they entertained numerous interludes and clandestine meetings in remote castles and chalets. They even set off together on a romantic journey to France, with the king discreetly disguising himself under another name as Count von Berg. It was undoubtedly his romance with Hornig that led Ludwig to break off his engagement with Sophie, yet this wouldn't be his last affair. Besides Hornig, Ludwig would also have many other male companions. Most notably, he sought out intimacy with the Hungarian theater star Josef Kainz, as well as the courtier Alphonse Weber. However, when it came to these conquests, the king showered most of his favor on Kainz, who brilliantly benefited from the scandalous arrangement. His generosity knew no bounds, both with his people and his paramours. When Ludwig had visited France in 1867, he was very impressed with the country's beautiful architecture. As he walked through the glittering Palace of Versailles, naturally, being the dreamer that he was, he envisioned the castles and chateaux that he could build in his own country. He wanted to beautify his own land as France had theirs. It wasn't going to be easy, but the ambitious king was more than willing to make some sacrifices in order to achieve his goals. Desperate to see Bavaria studded with fairy tale castles, the king dipped into his personal fortune to fund the projects. Ludwig felt fulfilled as his dreams slowly took shape. He constructed the magnificent Linderhof Palace, as well as the famous Neuschwanstein Castle, which was never fully completed. Although Ludwig had meant well by refusing to take money from the state coffers, his soaring personal debt was not helping the kingdom. By 1885, the king found himself in the dire situation of being 14 million marks in debt. He'd been wildly irresponsible by borrowing extravagant sums from his own family. Foolishly, when his advisors tried to give him financial advice, he spurned them and continued on with his grandiose designs and dreams. He sought out loans from other European royals, while simultaneously turning a cold shoulder to his stately responsibilities. His ministers were scandalized by this behavior, but their criticism only deepened Ludwig's annoyance with them. He saw their interventions as intrusions into his artistic vision, further isolating him from the political realities of being a ruler. Tired of his cabinet's criticism, King Ludwig considered replacing all the ministers with brand new faces. Shocked by this, the cabinet decided to take matters into their own hands. First and foremost, they had to depose Ludwig, but it had to be constitutional. They came up with the perfect solution, but it was very shady. Determined to overtake their king, the ministers decided to depose Ludwig by claiming that he was mentally ill. On the grounds of full-blown insanity, the king would be unable to rule. But they couldn't act right away. The ministers still needed proof, and they had a very underhanded plan to get their hands on some evidence. The ministers set their nefarious plan in motion. From January to March 1886, Maximilian Count von Hohenstein began putting together a report that detailed Ludwig's insanity. He focused on the most vulnerable people in the king's circle, his servants. Using his intimidating rank, Hohenstein bribed the servants to reveal Ludwig's darkest secrets. In speaking with Hohenstein, the servants confessed to witnessing Ludwig's bizarre quirks and odd behaviors, his severe shyness, his opulent indulgences, and his apathy towards matters of state. They also talked about his baffling desire to eat outside in frigid temperatures and wear warm clothes in the summer, something only a madman would do. The servants even claimed that their king was aggressive and threatened their well-being. Armed with a report filled with fragile accusations, the conspirators brought their case to Otto von Bismarck, Chancellor of the German Empire, who immediately sniffed out a rat. He doubted the report's accuracy and called it, quote, rakings from the king's wastepaper basket and cupboards. Bismarck correctly suspected that the ministers just wanted to save themselves. Nonetheless, he didn't do anything to disrupt their treacherous plans. As the conspirators couldn't acquire the help of Bismarck, they sought the help of 4 psychiatrists who put their stamp of approval on the report. This was perhaps the most traitorous move of all. All of these psychiatrists claimed that King Ludwig suffered from paranoia, even though it was a blatant lie, and all of them except for one had never even met Ludwig. And they certainly hadn't examined him properly enough to confidently diagnose him with paranoia. As a result of these controversies, in June 1886, a commission arrived at Neuschwanstein Castle, where Ludwig was. Although the commissioners had arrived with a deposition in hand, a loyal servant had tipped off King Ludwig hours in advance. This gave the king time to prepare. He ordered the authorities to guard him and to turn the unwanted visitors away. Not only did the commissioners have to face Ludwig's guard, but they also met the wrath of one of the king's most loyal supporters, the Baroness Esperanza de Sarachega. She flew at them with her umbrella, lashing out at them. After her outburst, she fled straight to Ludwig's side and identified every conspirator. He had them all arrested, but it was too late. The very same day, Ludwig's panic intensified. The government named Prince Leutpold as the Prince Regent of Bavaria. As the reality of what was happening started setting in, the deposed king listened as all of his allies pleaded with him to either flee or present himself in Munich. Instead, the king made an odd choice, opting to make a brash statement about the, quote, planned treason and false allegations. As it turned out, nobody believed in the authenticity of his statement, and with his disappointing show of leadership, his supporters began to trickle off. To make matters worse, the police that had been called in to protect him were replaced by 36 new officers who sealed off the entrances to the castle. Ludwig was now trapped. By the time he finally decided to flee, he'd waited too long. Soon enough, a second commission came for him, and this time they finally captured him. Distressed by this turn of events, King Ludwig asked one of his psychiatrists, Dr. Guden, how he could declare him insane when he had never seen or examined him before. Dr. Guden explained that he had no need to examine the king, as the evidence against him was already, quote, overwhelming. King Ludwig would be transported to Berg Castle, and the very next day, he and Dr. Guden would go for a walk along the shore of Lake Starnberg, and that was the last time they were ever seen alive. When they didn't return as planned, a search party spent hours searching the grounds in the pouring rain. Eventually, they found the bodies propped up in a ghastly manner in the shore's shallow water. It was a mystery right from the get-go, At first, all signs pointed to some sort of drowning, but the autopsy report found other conclusions. Firstly, there hadn't been any water in Ludwig's lungs. Secondly, Gudin's body showed signs of severe blows, and it even looked as though he might have been strangled. Some started to speculate that Ludwig had tried to escape from Berg Castle that day, and that his enemies had sabotaged his plans. But what had really happened? Interestingly enough, the king's personal fisherman, Jakob Liedl, held the missing piece of the puzzle. Ludwig's fisherman, Liedl, confessed that he was made to swear an oath that he would never ever say certain things about what happened. However, after he died, he left some interesting notes that provided insight into the mystery. Liedl's notes illustrated King Ludwig's escape plan from Castle Berg. The king had enlisted the help of the fisherman, who was to row him out to the lake, where a group of loyal supporters waited for him. The plan went wrong as soon as Ludwig made contact with Liedl. When he stepped into the boat, a shot rang out across the bank, killing him and making him fall across the bow. However, there was one problem with this series of events. Ludwig's autopsy did not report any wounds on his body. Another theory wonders whether he might have passed from natural causes, caused by shock in the cold water. But the mystery didn't end there. Arguments for the idea that he was murdered returned many years later. Down the road, Countess Josephine von Verbnikowitz presented a familiar-looking grey Loden coat to her guests during afternoon tea. She claimed that the coat belonged to King Ludwig himself. Turning it over in her hands, she pointed directly to 2 holes in the back of the coat. According to the Countess, it was all the evidence she needed that in her eyes, King Ludwig II had been murdered. To this day, much still remains a mystery, and Ludwig himself once said that he, quote, wished to remain an eternal enigma to himself and others. Many facts about his life and mental state cannot be fully confirmed and possibly never will be. However, according to one of his closest friends and cousins, Empress Elizabeth, she did not believe the allegations placed against him. She stated that the king was not mad, he was just an eccentric living in a world of dreams. Thanks for watching History Exposé. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring with us. Don't forget to visit our main page, Factinate, for more incredible facts about everything.